Hey, Sam, you come up with that intro line?
You didn't tell me that was today.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Writer's Room with Sam and Jim. This is the show where we bring aspiring writers into our writer's room to help them work on and develop their story. And we're going to do that with Sean Joseph in just a minute. But first, I want to go off about something. Sam, listen up. This is what I got for you. The thing I wanted to talk about is self-censorship, I guess is the way you call it, or self-editing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's all these rules about how you're supposed to write TV, how you're supposed to write anything, where you wind up getting up in your own head saying, I shouldn't say that. No, I can't say that. I can't say the other thing. You write for a network, you write for whoever, any kind of TV long enough, and you start getting into your head, the executives aren't going to like this, or the network won't like that, or the studio.
Or if you're an aspiring writer, I heard this in a seminar, and I read this in a book.
Right, and that's exactly what I was thinking of, is as you're a young writer, like, or an aspiring writer, like you're trying to wrap your head around how do you express yourself. And we were recently talking with someone about the need to have your own voice, right? You're supposed to write to what you know.
Ben Watkins, actually.
Right. And so I was thinking that can run up directly against this self-editing voice in your head that says, but I'm not supposed to write about that. I shouldn't express those kinds of opinions.
100%.
And it's 100% wrong, right? Like you have to, one of the things Ben was talking about in that same interview, our South by Southwest episode, was the fact that what he likes about a writer's room is that people, when he hands something that he wrote, say, to someone else like us to rewrite, maybe they're going to find something in there that he doesn't know about, that isn't him, but we bring it from our experience into that scene or into that script to find something new and unique and special, and that's what it's really going to be about, is that little nugget, right? And unless you free yourself to write what you really want to write about a scene, about a character, you're never going to get the nuggets. And if you don't get the nuggets, you're going to wind up with lifeless, drab, written by numbers kinds of writing.
I think it'll be worse than that, actually. I don't think you'll actually write a functional script, because there's so many contradictory lessons about stuff.
Right. So many paradigms, so many things you're supposed to do, you'll never actually do anything.
Also, even at our level, when the studio or the network gives us a note and they tell us, well, we really want this, how many times have we given them that and they're like, no, not that, or that's not what I meant, or this or that, because they don't really know either, because they're trying to figure it out for themselves.
Right.
And and that's when always we talk about what's the note behind the note, and we struggle with that. We're trying to figure it out and take a swing at it. But the thing is, if we don't believe in it, it's hard to write. And when you're an aspiring writer, you may not understand it. Forget believe in it. You may not understand it. And if you don't understand it, maybe you shouldn't be trying to do it.
Right.
Right? Maybe because how are you going to be successful doing that?
Right. And so you have to set aside those parameters, those rules. They're guardrails to keep you from driving off a cliff. And you need them for that purpose sometimes, but you can't worry about that when you're actually writing it. You have to write the scenes that feel true to you, that are saying something that makes you want to write that scene.
Right.
And if you're writing scenes where you don't have a piece like that, where there's something where you because of where the writers are coming at or coming at each other, if you can't find something that makes you impassioned about that scene, or that you think is really cool or true,
right,
then you're fucking it up.
Yep, that's true. And I think you meant the characters coming at each other.
Right.
And I think the thing is also, it doesn't have to be perfect when it's a draft.
That's right.
Right? You just get to the end, and that is the hardest draft you'll write. At least I think it is. I think different writers have, they're spew draft, no problem. But to me, the spew draft's the hard one, because all those things are in your head, and they're still in your head.
Right.
And by the time you get to page 50 or whatever it is, they're now on paper.
It's one of the things that I love about working with you is...
Uh-oh. There's a catch there.
but no, over the years, the way our partners is, we do different things for each other. We write differently. We tend towards different things.
Yeah.
But one of the things I do is I tend to write 4 pages for a 2-page scene as I work my way through all the pieces, and hopefully in there somewhere I found a nugget or two to work with. And then I hand it to you, and you go, we don't need all of this. We don't need this. We don't need that. But this.
Right.
This is the thing. This is what the scene's really about. And then we pick up that piece and go.
Yeah, that that is something I've gotten pretty good at. And the thing, and
by force as you weed through the hundreds of unnecessary pages I've thrown at you.
Well, that is true. Maybe because of that, or maybe a lot of times it's just I'm pretty good with prioritization. But the thing that I learned from you, since we're doing this incredibly treacly thing, but is, a lot of times I would write a scene and it would really move, and there would be the turn and be the surprise and all that stuff, and it would be the most efficient, cool scene. And by the way, a scene that I could build a career on, right? In the sense of many successful shows are a series of these kinds of scenes and nothing more. And then you'll say, can we dig in a little bit more here and find that, keep everything, but now let's flesh it out an extra half page. I'm not talking about a big thing, just to get some more juice, just a little more. I'm like, the emotion's right there. Yeah, but let's live in it a little more. And then we live in it a little more, and now it's because I am terrified of flab, and you're terrified of leaving something out. And that's sort of the balance.
That's kind of why our dynamic works.
It does, yeah. And actually, but to be fair, we don't write together a lot of the times. We write pilots together, but when we go on shows, and sometimes we're just writing different things. You'll do one script, I'll do a different script, and we're just on different things. But I have your voice in my head, and that helps a lot. And also the arguments that we get into sometimes are, but the mandate on this was to do X, and I want to say, screw the mandate.
Right.
This is not right for the thing, and you're like, yes, but that's the mandate. And then we go back and forth on that, and then we try to feel like, how can we satisfy this mandate? And it might be my script that I'm writing, but I'll still have to listen to you, and we'll go back and forth on it. Right. So
all this to say, fuck the rules. Okay, let's get into this week's show.
Sean, Joseph, this is Sam Ernst calling you.
And Jim Dunn.
How are you?
G'day, guys. Not too bad. How are you?
Well,
Good.
We're better now that we're listening to you and enjoying your accent. I hope you find our accent even vaguely amusing, but it cannot be. But I don't want to talk with you about your accent, and I'm sorry I even brought it up. But welcome. Thanks for coming on the show, man.
Yeah, thank you for bringing me on.
Now, if it's not abundantly clear to everybody, we're talking to Sean Joseph, who is from New Zealand. You're in Christchurch right now, right?
Correct, yes.
And so you're basically halfway across the planet, and you want to make television. And I got to tell you something right now, besides the fact that I'm blown away by this connection that we can talk to you that clearly. I got asked in a panel discussion a long time ago. A woman stood up. She was from Maine, and she said, I want to be a TV writer. Do I need to be in LA to be a TV writer? And on the panel, people were kind of hemming and hawing because no one wanted to say, yes, of course you have to be here, because no one wanted to kill a dream. Right, all our dreams are far-fetched with TV writing anyway. Even if you live in LA and your father or mother is the president of Paramount, it's still hard to do, let alone the rest of us who did not live in LA and don't know anybody in the business.
But what Sam did is he got out his Bowie knife and a whetstone, sharpened it up, and plunged it into her heart.
Metaphorically, that's true. I said, yes, you have to be in LA. There's just no way around this, right? Fast forward 15, 20 years, however long ago it was, and the answer is much different now. I mean, with Netflix making stuff and everybody making stuff.
Zoom rooms, and who knows what that's going to look like down the road.
Well, and Netflix is buying shows. I mean, I'm watching shows with subtitles all the time now. And they give me the option for the dubbed version. I'm like, why do I want to listen to this in a dubbed version? I'm not saying... by the way, Sean Joseph, that you would have a dubbed, but it's amazing now. They're made everywhere, and you can actually have a show on Netflix. I mean, I just watched White Tiger, which was it was in more than one language actually, and it was amazing. It was amazing. So I wanted to jump into that right away and say it's a brand new world, man.
Well, and I'll add to that. I was maybe 7 or 8 years ago now. Sam and I met with a New Zealand writer who was working on trying to get something like a showrunner's training program set up in New Zealand to help New Zealand writers.
That's right.
Because at that time, anyway, it seemed that most TV writers had to leave New Zealand to go work in Australia. Was the biggest?
Yeah, that's very much. Yeah.
Yeah, and he said something. There was like a soap opera, I think, that basically had most nights of the week in New Zealand.
He's probably talking about Shortland Street. Yep.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
So let's hear about you. Now that we have jumped right in and addressed where you are, let's talk about who you are. So what
cool.
makes you? What got you here?
What got me to want to be a writer?
Yeah.
I have always wanted to tell stories. I wrote my first story when I was like 5 years old. It was a Star Wars fanfic. I found out 20.
That's great.
I found out
Fantastic.
20 years later, and I found out 20 years later that the idea I had actually got turned into one of the best Star Wars novel series out there, the X-Wing saga. I'm like, well, if my ideas are that good, I could probably do something with it.
Good for you.
No vanity there at all, eh?
And then what? And you haven't written a story since. You were like, that was it. It was
Yep,
good.
I'm done. That's good. Yep. Truth is, actually, I've written all kinds of stories. So I've written a novel, I've written stage plays, I've always been writing, I've always been telling stories. And I just love telling stories, and I love capturing audiences and getting them to forget that there's anything else there but my story.
Yeah.
So it's a thing I want to do.
Have you produced those plays? Have they been produced, the plays or anything that you've written?
In a manner of speaking, there have been amateur productions.
Well, that counts.
Well, most plays are within spitting distance of an amateur production, unless you're on Broadway anyway.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's quite a range, but I think the thing about it is there's no more, to me, legitimacy. Like, we've worked on TV shows where the budget was $2 to $3 million, and we worked on TV shows. We just got off one where the budget is, in the teens of millions, right? And we've written scenes where we write in the church has 20 people, and the line producer says, when you say 20, you meant 3, right? And we've also had it when we were on Netflix, not Netflix, well, it was Netflix, but it was Daredevil. And we said, we wrote a scene where we're like, oh, the church is a quarter full, and the line producer came back and said, why don't we just fill the church? So I don't think the creative process is it's not different, and I don't find it much more satisfying. I mean, the geek in me loves it when you show up on set and there's all these people wearing amazing makeup, and they're doing like on Carnival Row or they've closed
prosthetics
off
and costumes and period.
I mean, that's just crack cocaine to a writer, but to TV writer, and then you get to or when they close off a street and they're shooting, or even when your name is, you made up something and people are actually taking it seriously, like the carpenters are actually building the set that you just thought of, while you're sitting. That's great, but
yeah.
But I will say this: please don't diminish the idea. It's not less because it got produced. It really isn't. And just speaking for a moment that Jim and I had was when we were casting the lead of our show that we created, Haven, back in the day. We when actors would come in and read for the role that we had named for my daughter, Audrey Parker, and they would read it, and we had lived with this character 5 years or more now and had written a million versions in different studios and different networks and all this stuff, and then they started reading it. Every time I'd have a deep emotional reaction, and I would turn to Jim and say, is she incredible? She's the best actor I've ever seen in my life. And he would say, no, she's not.
Right. Well, what's funny is, true story about that is the Emily Rose, who we cast, was, I think, the third actress who came in for the role. We saw 140 actors on tape or live before coming back to her.
Right. And but what I want to say is we when you're hearing the words spoken by someone who's an actor, it's magic. And when you go to the theater, it's magic. And you hear people laugh or respond emotionally to it. That's the magic.
Well, and that's the thing. It's not the sets; it's the emotional truth in the scene, right?
Yeah.
Which is the thing that writers supply. So maybe that's why we like that part the best.
Maybe. And, it's all good. I love all of it. But I'm just saying, if you wrote something and actors showed up, and even if it was just sitting in a circle in a room and they are performing it and taking it seriously, how good did that feel, Sean Joseph? That was probably pretty amazing.
It's absolutely amazing. It's one thing to write powerful words. It's another thing to actually hear them and see them come to life. It's incredible.
And to see what other people bring to them and find in them that you didn't know was there.
Yeah, the surprises are amazing.
Yeah.
I love being surprised by my scripts. It's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, so probably one of the biggest surprises I had was when a director decided to flip the gender of 2 of my characters.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah, so I wrote it as an anti-love story because there are a lot of love stories in Christchurch at the time. And I'm like, I'm sick of this shit. I'm so sick of it. So I wrote a story about a guy who looked like he was going to try and propose to his girlfriend, but actually he was telling her he was leaving and he was bailing out to go overseas and make a big name for himself. And the director came along and I was like, I trust you, just do what you want to do. don't even tell me about it. I'll come and see it on the night. And I went on the night, and I'm like, the dude had been cast as this tiny little girl who was like 5 foot tall.
Mm-hmm.
And the character I've written as a woman was this mountain of a guy. He was like 6'4" and nothing but muscle. And it just completely changed the tone of the story. And I was blown away. Huh. It was fantastic. And the director came up to me and said, did you like it? I'm like, yeah, it was awesome. This is great.
Yeah. You know, Sam and I did a pilot for FX a couple of years ago, and it was a couple that were running away on trains together, and there was all kinds of backstory, but we seriously talked about in the last version that we sent in about flipping the genders of the two characters, just because it would so change the expectations of what was happening in the scenes that it would instantly be very interesting all on its own, and it sort of exposes your own biases about how you write gender in different characters.
Yeah. Well, the thing that I was worried that it didn't work is because we are aware of that bias, we are always trying to write strong female characters, not necessarily good. They don't have to be right, they don't have to be good, but they're strong. And so when we talked about flipping it, I was like, oh, that is more interesting. But then it's just going to be some dude making these strong choices too. I didn't know if it was going to be enough of a swap. It wasn't, we had gotten educated by that point. And you know.
And I guess the thing there is too, like, trust the process and trust who else is picking up the script, that they'll know what they're doing too.
Yeah, that works both ways, but yeah, you're absolutely right.
Well, and it's the thing in the development process, at least at the outset, all you have are readers, right? You don't yet have those other ingredients. So so it's tough. Like, your script has to convey enough of the key things or enough exciting things, interesting things to win over a reader before you get all the other stuff added.
Yeah. Stuff that isn't necessarily valuable to an actor. But I'll tell you what's interesting working with actors sometimes is, you know, they'll bring in their pages, and they have worked over those pages 18 different ways, and they will ask you a question about, why is this half of a line in here, or this line? What does this really mean? And then you'll drill down in it, and you'll think to yourself, it doesn't mean a mother-loving thing. It's usually what happens is it did mean something once, but now there's been 27 drafts of it, and it has lost that essential meaning, and they found it. And the thing about that is, while you're momentarily embarrassed while you're talking to the actor because your name's on the script and you're producing it somewhere, I am both disappointed and absolutely thrilled.
Right.
Because someone else is paying that much attention and cares. They're not looking for a gotcha moment. They're just trying to understand. And that process, that is so cool.
And then sometimes you get someone who comes and says, is it okay if I say couldn't instead of wouldn't? It's like, yeah, that's okay. That's just fine. If that's how it comes out of your mouth, it's fine.
So Sean Joseph, you got some plays produced and you loved it, and then and what else are you doing?
I am also so I kind of take a wet spaghetti approach to life. So I just throw everything at the wall and see what sticks.
Mm-hmm.
So I am also in a circus.
Of course you are.
Good training for writing television.
Basically, all the contortion. Yeah.
Look, yes. Here's the contortions, and here's how we're going to make everything you love about writing disappear. Watch.
So you say you're in the circus. What do you do in the circus?
So I'm still currently a student at a circus school, but I am building a routine. So I'm doing acro, which is like picking up people the same way as me and throwing them around very gently. I've got a couple of aerial things I can do. So I'm doing aerial hoop and aerial rope, which is it's a lot harder than it sounds. And I finish every training session covered in bruises. Also probably a metaphor for writing. Really.
I'm guessing you're about 3 to 4 times as fit as the average TV writer.
I would assume so.
I just want to say, in defense of TV writers, a lot of us start the season pretty fit. and then
by the end of the season,
you're stress eating, and someone's bringing you food all the time, and the last thing you want to do. That's not true. It's less true, I think, than it used to be, but it's still true.
It's cool. Something for me to look forward to.
Yeah. So, Sean Joseph, let's talk about your idea.
Cool.
And what do you want to do with it? What is it? Let's talk about all that.
Okay, sweet. So first of all, I wrote this script as a feature, and I've come back to it and looked at it, and I feel like there's enough there to unpack into either a short series or a full TV show. So the title at the moment is Ceasefire, and the logline is currently 4 ostensible strangers meet in no man's land and find that between them they may be able to find a way to a lasting peace.
So is this in a war?
Yes, yep. So the premise is, for the feature at least, is that there's been a ceasefire call, and in that ceasefire these people come out of the war zone, meet in the ruins of an old mansion, and they are all connected to each other through various ways, and then argue their way essentially to some kind of peace by the end of the script. So there are 4.
What is the war? Where does it take place? What war is this?
Now, that is a note I've had from readers before. When I wrote it, I was focused very heavily on the characters. I've since written a semi-fictional fantasy world for it, but it could just as easily be on Earth in World War I, in World War II. It could be anything. So I haven't nailed that down yet.
Oh, wow. That's really interesting. Okay, so this really is malleable. Now, do you have an arc for the story in your film? Like, where does it start, middle, end? So maybe we can figure out how to break that up into... Let's see what we can do with that. So what's the story?
Cool. Okay, well, I'll focus on the characters. So the 2 major characters are Alessandra and Roland. Alessandra is a former princess. Roland is a former prince. They got married. Alessandra didn't actually want to be in the marriage. She got pregnant, decided she didn't want to be pregnant. The rules of the time forbid her from getting an abortion. She went and got one anyway. Roland's family decided to punish her and the people that helped her get the abortion. Enough of the people that helped Alessandra get the abortion survived to help her escape the marriage. And that's where the Civil War comes from.
It's a civil war.
Okay.
All right. So it's
Civil War, yep.
It's basically her side and his side then.
Okay, so we got the Montagues, and the Capulets. Okay.
Basically, yep. Except it's Alessandra, I have named her family the Cantatrices, and Roland's family is the Vocalans.
Got it. The Montagues and
the Capulets.
Cool.
The Smiths and the Joneses.
Do not get fancy with names. Cool.
No.
We just never remember it.
We'll
from
never
podcast.
remember. And I'm actually writing it down while I'm like, I don't know what that is. Okay.
Cool.
Okay. Totally cool. So it's a civil war in a country, and you've got 4 people in there, which is good. I mean, that there's those two from each side, right? Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. Okay. Yep.
And they have to work out a peace.
Correct, yep. Mm-hmm. So Alessandra and Roland are obviously the generation that saw the war start, and the other 2 characters are the generation that might see the war end.
Oh, so they're the prince and princess. They're older, so they're in their 40s or something.
Yeah, how many years has the war been going on?
So I've been thinking about that, and I was tempted to have like 50 years, like long enough that people have forgotten what peace feels like.
So right. So I get that. So Alessandra and Roland, they're older. They're in their They're 70s, I guess, if it's been 50.
70s, yeah, maybe a bit younger. I don't know. I mean, that's all right. I mean, flexible.
It's malleable. So they're middle aged, and the other 2 are Romeo and what are the Romeo and Juliet called?
Constantine and Isabeau.
And they are, is one of those on the Roland side?
Yep. So Isabeau is on Roland's side.
Mm-hmm.
Constantine is...
Are these children of theirs?
No, it's a little bit different than that. I'll get into the characters. So
sure.
It anchors on Constantine, or Constantine, I guess is probably an easier way of saying it. Mm-hmm. Now, he sort of ended up on the rebel side, not by choice. It's just he ended up on that side of the war. Mm-hmm. Constantine is a survivor. His main drive is that he just wants to be secure, but because of the situation he's in, he's having to do it day by day. His big thing is that he's an opportunist. And he's managed to sort it out so that he smuggles goods from his side over to the other side and does trades, and that's how he survives. Isabeau is a nun, a very young nun. She got put into a nunnery to keep her safe because obviously when wars go on, people get exploited, and her family decided that was the best place for her. The story starts with Constantine and Isabeau meeting in no man's land to trade tobacco and chocolate. Constantine is enough of a hustler that he's also trading with Roland without realizing what kind of person Roland is.
They know they're enemies. They know they come from opposite sides of this war.
Yep, they know they come from opposite sides.
But they don't care because they're trading. They're making a living.
Exactly, yep. And because it's a ceasefire, there's like a thieves agreement that they're not actually going to fight while they're here.
All right, so without getting into too many of the details, right, what is the arc of the in like 5 or 6 lines, what's the arc of the story?
Okay, 5 or 6 lines, I can do this.
It doesn't have to be exactly. I'm not, but
the short version.
What's the really short version?
The short version. Okay, good. So the short version is that Alessandra and Roland realize that their hatred for each other is what is fueling the war. This realization comes through Constantine and Isabeau being there and commenting on their hatred, and basically getting to realize that the only way the war is going to end is if they let go of their hate.
Mm-hmm.
They try to let go of the hate. They realize they can't. This is where it gets really dark. They both agree to commit suicide. So it really is Romeo and Juliet.
By the way, a somewhat successful play. I mean, it's
I've heard of it anyway.
Yeah. So and also even that exact play. I mean, every time I've seen it, and by the way, the Zeffirelli movie, and who's the other guy that did the movie?
Baz Luhrmann.
Yeah, Baz Luhrmann. I mean, totally different. And so infinite possibilities, right? And of course, Shakespeare based Romeo and Juliet on some other play story, so it's completely changeable. Here's the first challenge for this structure, which I'm sure you have already bashed your head on 4 times, which is there's 4 people, right? Mm-hmm. Which is
it's a stage play.
It's a stage play, and that's the challenge of making it into a TV show. It's also maybe even weirdly a plus because it's incredibly producible, and it's also I've not seen that before, but it's hard. I mean, I'm trying to open my mind to it, but we need people to do more than just talk to each other in this to be a TV show. We need action, and by action I don't mean blowing stuff up and running up mountains and all that stuff. I just need people to do actions that reflect their emotional, journey.
Well, and what interested me in hearing what you're pitching, Sean Joseph, is it feels like you have these 2 people who were married not entirely by choice, who then they had this experience and she went off, got the abortion, it started this war, and now they are the parent generation, they're the mature generation, looking back at the fruits of their handiwork, right? Like their dispute has caused this, and yet they find they still can't get past it, right?
Right.
Like that's a lot of emotional ground to cover, and it makes me wonder when I was asking whether the other 2 characters were their children, like there's a world if you want to crack this open and make it a TV show with other characters and a greater scope. There's all kinds of room to explore what that means to know that you are responsible for the war that is doing whatever it's doing to all these people.
Yeah.
To know that you meet with the person on the other side who you were married to, and yet you can't. It's like a giant parable for divorce in a way, right? Like,
interesting.
You are the parents of the nation, and you have destroyed or deeply affected the lives of your children, and yet you can't find common ground with your spouse, and the only way you can see to end it is to both kill yourselves. Holy shit! Like, there's a lot of story in that. You've picked really fertile emotional ground. There's a lot to work with in this.
Cool. That's nice to hear.
Yeah.
But are you 4 characters? 4 characters. That's tricky. When you wrote the story, the feature, how did you handle 4 characters? I mean, just how did you make that interesting for the 90 pages or whatever?
So Constantine, I guess, is like his drive is that he wants to be safe and he wants to be secure. So anytime there's a conflict, he's trying to smooth things over. He's trying to calm things down. The other 3 have very different ideas. Isabeau wants to be in charge of her own life. She actually kind of resents being a nun a bit.
Yeah.
Like, she just wants to be a girl. She wants to go out, she wants to date boys, she wants to drink wine and do all the things that teenage girls do. But she also acknowledges that being a nun is what keeps her safe. So she resents that, and she fights against herself a whole bunch.
But they're in they're in a no man's land, though. So how does any of that express itself in a no? Like, what does she do? What's her goal, and what gets in her way?
Her goal, we've noticed, is that she's the least realized character out of the 4 of them, I have to say.
Well, give me another character's goal. Any one of them, just one.
Okay, cool. Okay, so with Roland, he wants his wife back.
But how is he going to get his wife back? Oh, okay, so she's there. Okay, I get that.
Yep.
And what's her goal then? His wife. What's Alessandra's role?
Her goal, Alessandra's goal, is to absolutely break Roland. She wants him on his knees, crying and begging for mercy. Because
he wouldn't let her go when she ran off to have the abortion.
Yeah, he didn't support her.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
I have to say, Sean Joseph, just listening to this, like, I think you've picked really good paradigms for each of these characters. Like, I understand emotional drives that underpin them, and they are emotional drives that make sense for the character and that give you story. Like the conflicts here are all very natural for all of these characters to all be in the same place. They're all bringing things that are natural conflict givers.
But it still feels like a stage play, though.
Yes.
And that that's not a look. I think the mistake might be, because we've been here before, actually. The mistake might be to take a feature, make it into a TV show, and you're like, oh, well, I already got the structure of the feature. I'm just going to figure out how to make that into of the feature. I'll make that into a structure of the TV show. But I don't think that's what the feature is giving you. The feature is giving you a world. It's giving you characters with an agenda.
Right.
Now throw away the no man's land, particularly of it's only 4 people. It still can be no man's land. That's whatever. But may I propose that now we change it radically, so we get more people in there, and we get more to look at for your audience. More people that are now struggling under what happened between Alessandra and Roland and are still dealing with it. So we can see the poverty. We can see the stress.
The impact of the war.
Yeah, and I love what Jim was saying of they're 2 divorced people that are ex-lovers that have major issues, and everybody, it's like a divorced couple. And I'm not just saying that because my parents are divorced. I'm saying that because now, just knowing that gives me a way to start approaching that. Now I say, okay, in that paradigm, who are the kids? What do they look like? Are they the peasants? That would be the first idea of theater is there's the peasants, but it also can be other people.
Right, and each of them, if there's 2 sides, if it's developed into sort of like they each feel like they should be controlling the country in a way, like each of them may well have children at this point, right? Like the story of the girl who's a nun, like there's a whole life for her that you can see with her family, her friends, other girls in the convent, right? Like some of them want to be there, others are like her. What is the underground? What is her venturing into no man's land to have a date with a boy look like, right? Like there's the Constantine and his whole, smuggling. You have an entire world here.
Yeah. And it's almost a shame to keep it so that they're just in some sort of nondescript, no man's land somewhere. It's you're painting. And remember, I don't know if you want to actually make this eventually or not, but it costs the same amount of money to write exterior nomad land as it does
interior palace.
Yeah, interior palace. It costs. There's no difference in price, right? And and so I think the way to write with this stuff is never to try to write something producible at the start.
Right.
And then you can and then if someone actually gets interested, you could always dial it back. You know how many scripts we've turned in that even when we're on a TV show that are not going to make the days that we have on those shows. And we've worked on shows that shoot in 7 days and shows that shoot in 15 days. And that's a huge difference, obviously. And we're not good writers, senior writers are not going to write exterior surface of Mars if knowing that we can't. Well, nowadays, of course, I don't know how expensive that is, but I'm not saying that we completely ignore it, but I will tell you that I also remember writing towards a budget, and I came up with what I thought was a really cool thing. It was in Haven, actually, and it was the 10 plagues in the episode, and we couldn't afford a field of cows that were all dead because they were being killed by the livestock plague. So I said, well, why don't we do this? It's about the baby, and the baby's controlling everything. It's in her nursery, and all the wallpaper is cow and sheep and all that nursery wallpaper, and we'll have all the ink start to run on all of the livestock. And I thought that's really creepy, and it's understated. And more importantly, and the reason I came up with it was I knew we couldn't afford a field of cows. And then we turned it in, and the network president read it and was like, where the fuck is my field of cows?
It was pretty funny, actually.
It was. And you know what happened? We got a field of cows.
Right.
And
we made it from the network. Well, now we have to have a field of cows, right. Sam.
Yeah. And I learned my lesson. Which is write it as I actually thought that my version was a little cool, but bottom line is write it all out. Write it all out, man.
Write it all out.
And then worry about that down the line when someone actually wants to make it, and then you get into that problem. But you don't want to write a play, and then people are like, well, this is a play. We could do it on stage, unless you want it to be a play.
Well, yeah, and I would say one of my favorite movies of all time is The Lion in Winter. Katharine Hepburn and Peter O'Toole, which was a stage play, right? And they shot it as a movie. And it takes place in the 12th century, I think. Something that's Henry II and Catherine of Aragon, or not, whatever. Doesn't matter. Eleanor of Aquitaine. Thank you. But
Now you know what the inside of Jim's brain is like, and why he'll sit in a chair and just stare into space for a very long time, having elaborate conversations with himself.
But anyway, so it's a stage play, right? And the movie's great. It's totally worth watching. Won a ton of Oscars for reasons. But in the play, it's her versus him. They have their 3 sons, who are Richard the Lionhearted, John, and I forget the middle one.
Let's just call him Tony.
Yeah, Tony.
Dylan.
Doesn't matter.
Sloan.
But it's much the same power dynamic as you're talking about in many ways. It's these 2 people who hate each other, yet they're linked together, and the fate of their kingdoms sort of depend upon each other, and it's sort of a stage play. I would say there's half a dozen, maybe 7 characters in that movie.
Right.
It's something you might want to look at as you think about this.
Yeah. That's a good idea.
And then
it is a play, and by the way, the movie is a play.
It's a filmed play.
It's a filmed, yeah.
They found ways to expand it out, but there's also tricks for how they introduced action into it. They did the theater thing of the person hiding behind the tapestry, right? Because it's the 12th century, and you have tapestries. But anyway, but what I was trying to get to about that is, in looking at that, it's what I have in my head when I'm hearing you talk about your story, and the idea that you make a limited series where you're doing 8 episodes out of this, and you have time to live in the worlds of each of these characters and get their slices and see what it is that everyone is bringing, the burdens and the emotions that are bringing to No Man's Land for this meeting.
That's right.
Right, where you're actually going to try and make peace.
Yes.
Suddenly you can actually charge all of that even more, with more emotion and more depth and impact, because we know all of these people before you gather them together.
Right, 100%.
Right. Sweet. So you're sort of seeing the meeting in No Man's Land as being pretty close to the end of the series.
Well, it doesn't have to be. I think
there's a number of ways to do it. It's just if we know them all first, wherever you want to put it.
I mean, it depends on what story you have after they get together. Right. And then so if you have a lot of story for after that, then it could be episode 4 out of 6 or 8. Yep. It can be wherever. I mean, I hate to go back to the Game of Thrones, well, only because I keep doing it, but that did do something that was cool, which was we got to know people in different kingdoms before they came together. And that really made it interesting, because it's I think I've said this before, but it's kind of like being at your own wedding, where you know everybody there, and you're looking at, your father's best friend, and you're looking at your wife's cousin's, girlfriend, and they have nothing to do with each other, but you know them both.
Right. You're the connection between all of them.
The audience is the connection.
Right.
And that's cool. And I think we've accidentally tossed one element of yours, which is these 4 people get together in the desert or No Man's Land, and we don't know anything about them, and you slowly peel it back. Right. And so I just want to acknowledge that is the cost, one of the costs of what we're doing here, unless you lived in flashback all the time, which is, not generally how we like to tell story. But that's not, it's not a bad way. It can be done. And it's done. And then everyone says we shouldn't do that. And then you watch television, and one of the best episodes of West Wing ever was told almost entirely in flashback. And the best episode of this and that, it's just, you don't want to overuse it. But if it's a core thing of your show, and these 4 strangers get together, not strangers, by the way, but these 4 people that we don't know and are getting together with an agenda, and then we tell an episode on each one and slowly move their story forward as part of the arc, that's interesting.
Yeah, totally.
It could be. I mean, there's so many cool ways, but the structure is the issue.
Well, and I guess, too, like, to take another step back to your original stuff you have here, like, what is the theme, or what is the story you're trying to tell? Because whatever that truth is that you're working with here at the heart of your story, presumably each of these 4 characters has some different piece of that truth in their own world, in their own way, and you bring them together to get some larger picture. So the question is, if you were to do, say, as Sam's saying, 1 episode for each of these 4 characters, is there enough of that truth, or are there enough angles on it for you to tell a story about each of them that would be a satisfying episode that works with that piece?
And that's tricky. Just so you know, I get what Jim's going on, and I'm like, oh, that's a big ask, because now you're setting up. They need to have pieces to this puzzle. You, the writer, need to know what those pieces to the puzzle are, and then they're going to bring. And it's not going to work, but there's going to be problems. But you bring it together. That seems hard to do, And there's.
I'm not saying puzzle in the sense of a mystery, right? It's not you have to have pieces that fit together like that. I'm thinking more the emotional truth. Like each of them in a way is representing from what I've heard, right? They each have a different piece of the power dynamic of how you survive in life and conflict, right? Like there's the both the women in this story are somewhat captive to the powers of others, except that Alessandra broke free of that, right? She made an arbitrary decision. She went off and took power for herself, but the whole land is paying the price of that, whereas the girl who's been made a nun has surrendered to her parents' power, right? And she's living. So there's just different angles on what you're working with as you're telling the story of how do you find peace in no man's land.
I want to ask you this, by the way. I'm not you, Jim. I want to ask Sean Joseph. Do you have the gun in your mouth right now, or are you still loading the chamber? What's happening right now with you?
From what you guys are saying,
yeah,
it's actually fascinating. This is great. You're showing me stuff that I've been thinking about without actually realizing I've been thinking about it.
And that happens a lot. We do that with each other all the time.
Yeah, that's what writers do for each other.
Great. Yeah, it's fantastic. So,
what we're not doing for you is helping you break it. Which is what the show is supposed to be about. And I want to step away from the theory of this for just a second, and let's break something. Let's just break one thing, okay? So it makes some sense. Is there anything that you that we were talking about, any of the three of us, that sparked to you that we should build on? Any piece, and then we'll just start building on that.
I guess what we were talking about there with the truth of the characters and finding what that is and finding how we break the one truth of the story into 4 pieces for each character. Is that something that we can break?
Yeah. So the question, so I think the thing, here's my pitch to you, is if we have 4 worlds for these people, not worlds is wrong, 4 towns. They're in 4 places, a castle.
4 lives. They each have their
4
own
lives,
life.
Right. And if we do Jim's thing of each episode is 1 life, or do we do 4 per episode? Pick one. Which one do you like, Sean Joseph?
I like the idea of 1 life per episode.
Okay. So then the question is, if we go back to Alessandra, this is a woman who has basically, by her choice to have an abortion, has cleaved this nation in half. And and before I get in trouble, I want to say it was the people's decision to cleave it because they reacted to her right to go have I'm not making a political statement, but she had the act. She's the one who slipped away,
right,
and did this thing. And where has that left her? And how does she feel about it? And by the way, that's something that happened 30 years ago or 40 years ago, whatever.
And how did she come into that situation? Was she like the girl, I'm sorry, I keep forgetting her name, who had to become a nun? Like was if this was a marriage not of her choice, right? Like, how she entered it in a corner in a certain respect, if that's true.
That's true, but
yes. So the backstory I currently have is that the Cantatrices and the Vocalans were very prominent families in the country that I'm still yet to name, and it was an arranged marriage designed to bring peace to the country and just nail down some of the looser elements of the country.
Right.
So they were already from 2 different sides of ancient grudges. Alessandra initially felt that it was her duty and that she wanted to do this sort of stuff. Now that we're talking about focusing on their backstory, I can see in my head her finding a friend that is maybe a little bit freer than her, a little bit wilder than her, and just shows her that actually she doesn't need to follow the duty and that she can be a little bit more free. And when she tries to do that, she gets punished and she rebels a little more. This is back when she's obviously quite a lot younger. So I'd say there are definitely allegories between her and Isabeau.
Well,
that sounds like the basis of quite a relationship for her and Isabeau too. Like, there, depending on how you break out what it means to go into no man's land and who knows how long you're there and all that kind of stuff. But there are definitely women who have things in common.
True. Now, I do want to say though, first of all, let me just say about backstory. Backstory is great, but only if it gives me front story. Right. Otherwise, it has no value. So, and some people really need that backstory to get the front story. Some people don't. It's just process. I'm not against backstory. I'm just, sometimes people, writers can really go down the rabbit hole of. In 3rd grade, they had a Scooby-Doo lunchbox and somebody stole it. But what I want to say about that is, all right, now we're meeting in the present day. So present day, it's.
I was going to say, I mean, this is, in talking about turning this into a series, though, I mean, there's a world where you see that backstory.
You could.
right? Like because it's going to
Survivors of the
well, and it informs the front story, right, in a very direct way. So there is a world where it's not just flashbacks; you're almost living in two timelines,
Right.
as you see what was then and what is now. It's out there; it's possible.
Right. You could. You got to find the simple version of that. Timelines are tricky, but yes, that could work. I'm trying to think what does that now, but yeah, you could.
Visually, it would be really easy. Like, could just refer to a building in ruins and then a building not ruined.
Interesting. That's true. Visual references are great.
Yep.
But what I'm saying is, if we're meeting her now, or whenever we meet her now, this is a woman whose actions caused a lot of despair. And what effect did that have on her? So that you could have, she has now, and I'm just pitching, she could become now the most conservative woman you can imagine. She is now living in fear of her former self. And you know who is that fear? Represents that fear? Isabel. Because this is a woman, Alessandra, she caused a war. And whether she did or she didn't, maybe she feels like she caused a war. Right? And then you don't have to get into the particulars. But she did this, and now she's operating in fear of that. And that's why she's so angry at Roland, because he destroyed not just the country, but destroyed her, because she has she's been living in this for the last 40 years in this prison of guilt and remorse and anger.
It's funny because you say that, and I thought, well, you could say exactly those same things about him.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But you can't do the same thing for both.
Right.
They have to have they should have slightly different reactions, because then we won't overlap in terms of the story. But well, and what's his reaction to it? Has he gone on? Is he a dick? Has he gone on and been hugely successful and he's it turns out it's the best thing that ever happened to him, because he's now a general, was a general in the army, has medals and 5 wives and whatever the hell it is.
And to pile onto that, like sort of baked into what you were talking about, that the country, they were supposed to bring peace to the country, so that there were already these existing divisions, right? So it sounds like in what Sam's pitching, you're living in a world where maybe this is actually working out for him, right? Like the old divisions were better for him and his family than they were for the other side.
Yeah, it's a success for him.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But maybe not. And maybe he's coming to the table. His intention of coming to the table in his no man's land is to kill everybody. That's his actual plan. And I'm just trying to dive in, and I don't know what the story is, so I'm trying to say there's got to be two disparate reactions to that, and their personalities have changed as a result of that and the lives they've had in the intervening time. And this show could be about them finding their way back, if they do, to where they were emotionally.
Yep.
Right? So that she lets go of the anger and lets go of all that. And maybe he does too, or maybe he doesn't and he dies in the end. And then she ends up hooking up with Constantine, who she should be with anyway. Because he's devilish, the Han Solo here. And then, okay, she's got 30 years on him, but, love is love, baby. I mean, you see how I'm trying to spin it out? Yeah,
absolutely. And that's actually a really good note. Like, it does make Roland and Alessandra more distinct, so I like that.
And all I'm trying to do is spin it out as you should throw all this away.
Right. But you can spin all of them in different directions, just as long as you spin them.
But right. And I'm trying to find a realistic, something I would buy that someone would react to an event that way. And she could come out of this guilty, she could come out of this angry, she could or both. It's so many different things. And I want his thing to be different. And then I'm going to ask you, when we get to Isabeau, when we do Isabeau and Constantine, how are they different? And how do they interact with, if Alessandra and Roland know each other in any way? I'm sorry, not Roland, Constantine. Do they overlap in any way before they get to that thing, to that meeting? And what does he do for her, or drive her crazy, or what is their relationship that is counter to each other? So we get really good conflict, and we get them bouncing off each other, And then I start getting into details, because details that are actual story, not because I want to use them, we'll end up it's just scaffolding, but it'll start coming to us, I think, like, oh yeah, you know what, Constantine's a real dick. And that's good, and we're going to live in that. And then, of course, the annoying question that Jim's going to say, why is he a dick? What made him a dick? And in what way is he a dick? And by the way, does that mean something different in New Zealand?
No.
Okay.
It can do, but it's based on context. I know exactly what you mean.
Okay, so being a dick is universal.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, that's so that's all the right. So that when we break it, that's what we're looking. That's what we're doing.
I really
Cool.
I want to say here, Sean Joseph, I think you've tapped into something really good. The where your mind goes in terms of building your characters and the kind of conflicts you tee up for them is
Mhm.
great. You're going straight to emotional conflict and emotional content in the way you build story, and
Cool.
it's home run stuff.
The thing that, yes, 100%, but the thing that is going to be necessary for it to go to TV land, as opposed to, you don't want to write a 900-page Robert Jordan book. I don't know if you know him. He wrote a lot of
Yep.
fantasy,
The Wheel of Time.
Wheel of Time,
Yeah.
and Jim and I suffer through those books, and there's great ideas in there, and there's great stuff, and then there's hundreds of pages of like, oh my God, just shoot me, and
4,000 pages later, it still hasn't gone anywhere. And
Right,
you're like,
right, and but you keep reading because it's so cool. If you've made this into a book, no matter what happens, people have to do stuff, and you don't want to create a situation where what they do can't be that interesting because you didn't give them enough of a tableau of a place to do that.
Right.
And you want to do yourself as the writer the service of, you know what, she's still in a castle and she's got an army and oh my God, stuff's going to happen. And your mind will go crazy just because you did that, as opposed to I've stripped her of everything and now I put her in the middle of someplace where she has no advantage. And I'm going to try to stretch that out for 6 or 8 episodes or 10 episodes or whatever. And that's going to get dicey. You know what I mean?
and that's where Lion and Winter is a good thing to watch because the one of the things that play that they filmed did tremendously well is there was just an endless turning of secrets and things being revealed and changing attitudes, and King Henry had all the power, Peter O'Toole, right? So like he would just, suddenly he's waking everyone in the castle up and he's going to get married to his mistress right now, right? But then they pull trump cards on each other over and over again, and it was great. But it's a parlor drama in effect, taking place in a castle.
Right.
There's no actual action, or there's very little actual action.
Yeah, I don't recommend doing that, by the way.
No, and that's
It's just
what I'm saying.
right. Yeah.
I'm backing up what you're saying, that
Yeah.
for a TV show, you want to put people in situations where they're living lives and they're
Right.
actually doing some things. And if this is your culminating episode or whatever that it gets you here, well, you can have had enough happen that by the time they get here, we actually care about what goes on in what is essentially a parlor drama as they hash through it.
That's right. And we're not advocating just, okay, now send out the army and go do something. If you just go back to Game of Thrones, which was an incredibly expensive show, a lot of it was people walking around and talking in castles or walking in a field and talking I mean, there's a lot of that too, right? And then it would all lead to something. But it wasn't like bam, bam, bam. We're never advocating for that. That's an action movie, and that's not it's not right.
And to add another layer to that, like these things where you're wanting to, create or demonstrate something about Alessandra's character, right? The things that she is having done or that she's doing or that are being done against her should be things that are feeding our understanding of her perspective and why she's doing what she's doing and how she feels about what she's doing, and that maybe make us sympathetic to her and her perspective. Ideally, by the time all four of these people come together, we are sympathetic with all four of them, so that then we want them all to
That's
win.
what I want to do. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You just
absolutely have people like arguing about which side they want to win, and no one's actually going to get what they want entirely. That's
The way to do that is to hurt them in the way that hurts them the most. Right. So whatever her problem is, if her thing is guilt, force her to have to order the death of somebody. Come up with some reason why she has to kill somebody, and it'll kill her. It'll kill her, but it also will show. But she will kill somebody, and it'll be terrible. It'll be terrible all the way around, and it'll be great television. Find a way that whoever needs, prides themselves in being loyal, force them to be disloyal. Force them to make an impossible choice that way, or let them be disloyal or let them be loyal. For example, it's another Game of Thrones. I feel like I watched one show, but have them be loyal, and then have them pay a terrible price for it. And it's not them; it's never them. Have them pay a terrible price when someone they love dies as a result. It's those kinds of choices and actions get down to the core hurt of that character, and then we're in the money. And then by the time they get together, we know everything about these people. We know more about them than they know about themselves.
And like going off of
I
what
like that.
Yeah, going off what Sam's saying there, like, you know, when you were introducing your cast of characters, I get a smuggler in No Man's Land, I get the two principals, I don't get the nun. You know, the crappy top of my head version is, you know, the person that Alessandra has to kill is a woman who is at the convent who Isabeau helped to escape to get out and be with her boyfriend, right? You know, whatever that is, there might be a way you get a personal context for the characters.
That confuses
me.
I don't understand.
I'm looking for, why is the nun there, right? Why did she come there?
Yeah.
And it's because one of these other characters has done something to her in her life that is feeding back into this moment. If maybe she came there chasing Constantine because she had an affair with Constantine.
Right.
You know, I don't know. It could be anything, right? But what is...
I would not... That's a good question. And what I would be careful of is don't fix in your mind what's going to happen at the No Man's Land, particularly. Just sort of get a rough... Then go back to the story, the main story, or the present day, whatever you're going to do in the castles in the regular part of the show, the other part of the show, I should say regular, and then go back to the No Man's, and you keep adjusting both as you get there, and because you'll discover things as you go.
I think it'll always be more interesting because there's such a good connection between the two principals that are there in No Man's Land, Alessandra and the King Roland. You know, you want the other two to have context to be there also. That ideally is off of each other or off of those two in some way, whether it's because Constantine, you know, his father was killed by Roland 10 years ago and he's come to kill him, right? Or whatever it is. There's just connections between them, because for that sort of the parlor drama element, when you get to it, we want there to be as much as possible between those four.
Right. And many connections is what I think. Yeah, so that matters.
Right.
Right.
So they're invested in each other in different ways, pro and con.
Yep, more connections. Yeah, and like your note about Isabeau is definitely something I've been feeling with every version I've written of this. Is I've been trying to give her more agency, but what I haven't been doing is giving her more of a reason to be in the story and more connections to the other characters. So that's what I need more of.
That's right.
More connections.
All that. Yep, exactly. 100%. Cool. Wow, that was cool. Helping. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jean-Joseph, for it's an interesting world, and you have tied so deeply into the Jim's not so inner geek fantasy love that he has.
I'm a history buff, so the idea of this sort of historical like
he is a history buff, but I think this is also hitting your I can just see Jim 1990 something sitting in a big chair with a cigarette back then, having an 800-pound fantasy book. The third and fourth and fifth ones in the seasons lined up in the series lined up right next to him. he's got a cup of coffee that was hot 6 weeks before that, and he's just slowly working on it. And I'm like, okay, man, enjoy your spring break.
And that would be me as well, baby.
Okay. There you go.
Definitely a love connection happening.
Except you'd be hanging from a rope from the ceiling.
No, I think the geek magnet thing has worked really well today. Sean Joseph, total pleasure, man. Thank you so much for coming on today. Really appreciate it.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
Good luck, man.
Cheers. Thank you.
And that's all we've got for you this week. Our producer, J.R. Zamora-Thal, is working the mixing board.
Our logo was designed by Julien Debar-Monclair, and our music was provided by Boudereys out of Austin, Texas.
If you want to get in touch, we are at The Sam and Jim on Instagram and Twitter, and you can find us on Facebook and YouTube as The Writers' Room with Sam and Jim.
And if you like hanging out in the room with us, give us a follow on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
And tell a friend, would you, so we can get JR paid. Thanks, everyone. See you next week.